I would add the word of encouragement in terms of Pastor Appreciation Day. I think most pastors have a little bit of beagle dog in them. They love to be patted on the head and told good dog. It is important. It is worthwhile. It deserves your attention. Okay. Are we not on yet? Hit the right button. There we go. Uh-oh. That's a bad sign. There we go. Okay, good job. Just a brief rehearsal of things we were closing out with, that good discussion from this morning. Appreciated your thoughts and your insights. Hope we have some other opportunity, plan on having some other opportunity for that this afternoon, though I will trust Kevin to pull the plug on us when we need to. We don't want to miss that meal or a break time. So. We noted that church size impacts congregational life, and that's why it's important to know. That's the number one reason to know church size. We talked about how small churches really include two very different cultures, the pastoral culture and the family church culture. I emphasize that small churches are found in all kinds of settings. And we talked about the role of church history behind, or how it differentiates further small churches in terms of churches that have been small their entire history, and they know what that's about, and they're comfortable with it, and they've never been tainted, if you will, by anything else. As opposed to those churches that have been the up and down and are now numbers-wise maybe the same as a small church, but their culture and their thoughts and their attitudes are still like that church back up there, and they haven't made peace with that, and they've got the baggage of building, over-organization, over-programming attitude, all that stuff going on. And so we're going to pick up with that. Good. You heard some of the stories there at the beginning. The truth is, nobody's going to come in and take charge of a family church. And pastors need to be relieved of that responsibility and get over that and understand that our role in those churches is to preach and teach and to take care of people that are in the hospital. And if we're fortunate enough to stay there long enough, we will get enough political capital to be able to work through the system and encourage people to do things. But we will never lead from a board or from a committee in those kinds of churches. It just doesn't happen. Well, that really brings us to the point that one size or one style does not fit all persons. It doesn't fit all pastors or clergy. And it doesn't fit all churches. And yet we tend to treat churches and pastors and people as if they're Legos, and you can just stick them all together in all kinds of ways and it doesn't matter. And it's simply not true. You heard in the conversation as we were closing out this morning about feelings of mismatch with the church that you were in and the culture not being right. That's what that's all about. It's not about being right or wrong. It's about not being a good match on things. And the sooner we recognize that and pay attention to that, the better it is. The truth is, it's not just a matter of pastors and churches in terms of match. It's a matter of churches and people, too. Sometimes people don't match with that particular church, and that's okay. It sounds crude to say it, but I'll say it to the pastors here. Sometimes the best way for you to bless somebody is to say, you need to find some place that's really good for you, and I really sincerely pray that you'll find that place, and let them go. Fighting to keep people that don't match is not good for anybody. It's not good for them. It's not good for the church either. And so hope you will pay attention to that. And so we're going to talk about how small churches match with particular needs right now. And so they are a particular kind of match. Anybody know this place? You probably should. It's the world's largest public employer. It employs over 2.2 million people. It's the world's largest public corporation. There are over 11,000 stores across the world. Its net income is about $16 billion. This is a juggernaut. You know that place? Those little Family Dollar stores maxed out at probably 2,000 square feet, depending on where they are. Maybe a half dozen employees, never more than 2 or 3 at any one time in there. Limited merchandise, special place. But something happened this summer. Did anybody see this from Fortune magazine? You saw it. A couple of you did. Why is this important? Well, it's important because Family Tree and Family Dollar went through a merger this summer. Now, do you know Family Tree also? It's a store very comparable to Family Dollar. Dollar Tree, yeah. and as they merged, their ending organization then had 18,000 stores, 50% more stores than Walmart. Little stores, 2,000 square feet. Their merchandising looks at $18 billion a year. Those stores found a niche. They found a place. And if you drive through the countryside, you'll find those stores in places that Walmart wouldn't go. And they service people that Walmart doesn't service. And they are important in places where Walmart is not important. I think it's true for small churches as well. There's a place for small churches. We can touch people in small churches that the large churches will never touch because we're not Legos. Some people will never be happy in a larger church. Some people will never feel at home. They'll never experience the community in those churches that they can in a small church. Small churches can go into places that the larger churches cannot. Let me mention 4 things that I believe that are related to this ability for small churches to create and discover a niche. One is I think that small churches are in a unique situation to be able to provide a safe environment for authentic community. And I mean here koinonia, not neighborhood community. And you heard us in the conversation earlier this morning talk about the importance of safe place. And yeah, I really do think small churches are in a better place to do that than most large churches are, if they work at it. Now, it's too easy for us to build it into a fortress, but I think small churches are naturally in a place where they can provide a safe environment. I think small churches are inclined to have a connection with and a godly concern for their community, their immediate surroundings, than larger churches do. Larger churches, by their nature, are regional churches. They draw people from all over, 30, 40 minutes away sometimes. And because of that, it's not bad, but because of that, they lose that grassroots connection with their neighborhood. On the other hand, a small church is dug deep in that neighborhood under the best of circumstances, and they have the potential for exhibiting a godly concern for that community, that neighborhood, in a way that a larger church cannot. I think small churches potentially awaken and engage the gifts of a higher proportion of members for God's mission. Put it another way, in small churches, if they're going to do God's mission, somebody more than the pastor has to be involved, because the pastor can't do it all. And it is a fact that's demonstrable statistically, that the larger a worship community is, the fewer proportion of people that are involved in the mission of that church. It just happens. And so there's the potential in smaller churches that more folks will be involved in mission, in ministry, in discipleship than they will be in larger churches. And fourth, I think that small churches are a good setting to learn and to practice spiritual discernment, which I think is a fundamental discipleship issue. The issue came up some in the conversation we had with the students right before lunch, that spiritual discernment is something that spirits is something that Baptists are afraid of. For most Baptists, the spirit is kind of like that strange uncle you just as soon didn't show up very often. But the truth is, we're in a time probably like we've never been in, at least in my lifetime, that requires more spiritual discernment than we've ever had before, and how to do that as communities of faith. And the truth is, I didn't learn how to do that growing up in a Baptist church. And it's something we need to work on. And I think the conflictual issues that we're having to deal with today can only be addressed through spiritual discernment, and that can happen better in a small church than it can anyplace else, in a healthy small church. Well, we've always had small churches around. We talked earlier that small churches were the norm in this country up until the 19th century. So why is this a big deal now? Well, I think there's three reasons. One is, even on those stable small churches that have been small for a long time, financial reality is coming to bear on them now, and is influencing them in a way that it was not 20 years ago. The costs of doing business, if you will, has gotten so out of hand and out of proportion to the numbers that it's hard for them to support it. And then at the other end are those Category B churches, if you remember, that I talked about earlier, the churches that have shrunk or are stagnant, have found themselves in a place that puts them in a financial bind too. Both of those are financial pressures. We'll talk about that. But the third one is common to all churches, but I think it has a unique flavor in small churches. The issues of mission, organization, pastoral leadership, facility, and finance. Now, that's true for every church. Anybody that's a pastor knows that. You deal with those five things. But it has an urgency in small churches in a way that it does not in larger churches. And that's a reality that seldom gets talked about. And yet, any of us that have had any leadership courses know that the first responsibility of any leader is to define reality. But the real bind we're in right now is reality has become a bear to define, and is so confusing, so overwhelming, that we really can't get our hands wrapped around it. Does anybody feel overwhelmed? It's just the tip of the iceberg. And obviously this is a couple of years old now, and had a very narrow focus on things. But it's crazy, isn't it? I mean, we really can't even begin to keep up with it, and yet somehow or other we have to describe reality and adjust and help our churches respond to that, and find out what that's all about. And I just, you wonder sometimes if folks are aware of the changes that are happening around them. Now, there's a lot of focus on the technological changes here, but clearly in this particular video clip, but clearly those aren't the only changes happening. There's just a lot of stuff going on out there. And are you sitting down and you're thinking about it? Are you calling attention to it? Are you thinking about it theologically? Are you reflecting on it as a Christian? What does it mean for this stuff? Like he kept asking all the way through this thing, what does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean for the church? What does it mean for me as a minister? What does it mean for the mission of God as we're at work in the world? I'm convinced that change is necessary because the world that God has sent us into has changed. There's no escaping that. That doesn't mean the gospel changes. The only thing it doesn't change, I believe, Scripture, when it says Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, it doesn't say anything about your church. It doesn't say anything about your pastor. It says it's Jesus Christ that's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And we need to make sure that that's our anchor and not some human aspect of that or some temporary aspect of it, like particular church structure and what we're doing. Now, change is necessary. And the paradox is that it is the resilience of small churches that makes them especially resistant to change. It gets to be a joke after a while to talk about change in a small church.
You're not on the farm. The Lord, she says, will give you a carrot. Well, what's just the road? See, this is what I'm talking about. You're so obsessed with the house being clean, look what you're doing to yourself. Fine. Put your shoes back on and get up wherever you want. Put that on. Yeah, check the expiration date on your feet. What are you doing? What's going to change? I'm taking you to the door. Who are we going to sue? It's right here on the top. I don't pick up these kids anymore. I'm nothing if I'm not flexible. What are you saying, Marie? We can sit on the couch? You're my expert. Go ahead. So, we can really sit there on the actual couch? You first. I can let go. It's nice fabric, isn't it?
It's very nice. It feels a little naughty.
Can't wait till summer.
Well, what about you, Marie? You spent all these years knocking yourself out clean. You should enjoy this.
Right. Thank you, Dad. Excuse me?
This is nice.
How many of you have had good experiences with change in your church? It is a struggle, isn't it? It is a struggle. And for too many of our churches, this is the paradigm for change. You finally get somebody browbeat into doing it, and it gets handled so badly that you end up snapping back to what you were before. Now, the truth is, some of us older ones are going to have to explain to the younger ones what this clear plastic stuff on sofas are all. I remember that. We don't see much of it anymore. But seriously, it is a challenge for us, and I think it's a special challenge for small churches, is to come to grips with the change that they need to do with it. And part of there's so many dynamics going on with our smaller churches. Part of it is that they're typically, back to our bell curve thing, typically these are older folks, and they have dealt with a mountain of change in their life. Need to remember that they have absolutely dealt with a lot. I can remember being home from the University of Alabama, watching on TV with my grandfather the lunar landing. And my grandfather remembered the first biplane that flew over the farm. That's a lot. My grandmother was sure they never really went anyhow. The whole thing was faked out in Arizona, you know that. But the truth, that really exemplifies all the change that they've had to deal with. And church has become the one safe place for many of them not to have to cope with that. And so while I believe that it's absolutely essential that we deal with change in our churches, I think that many of our churches are way past renewal and transformation. We're talking about radical re-engineering right now. It has got to be done in a pastoral care way, because those folks are going to get left behind on things if we're not careful. It is hard for us. So I'm serious now in the question. Let's talk about some of the ways that you've dealt with change in your small church and your experience with that. Who's brave enough out there to talk about how you blew it? Anybody? Nobody.
My last church, we went to 2 services so we could have a temporary service. And it lasted 2 or 3 years, and then they said, we want to be back together.
Put the cover back on, yeah.
They went back together again,
Yep.
and as soon as they went back together again, they had half the number of people.
Yeah. Not uncommon. Not uncommon. Somebody else.
The talk was we wanted to add PowerPoint, and the church that I pastor has about 25 on average. And so we needed a new sound system and PowerPoint, and of course I was all behind that and supportive of that. And so we had the technology people come out, gave us an incredible quote that kept us in mind that we were a small church, so financially it was going to be very affordable. But here was the change. The illuminated cross in the front of the sanctuary that had been there forever was going to have to come down.
Yeah.
A year and a half later, the church decided to stretch their wings and try and bring it down with the understanding that it was going back up somewhere else. And I prayed that it could not go somewhere else. It was the most tacky cross that lit. That it was unbelievable. But the family, the church family, loved it. And so it was a struggle between what they thought was honoring God and moving it.
Yeah.
And so what we did was the technology people came in, and he pulled me off to the side after he removed that cross, and he said, "You better be thanking God we brought this down." And I said, "Oh, really?" Explain. And it was bare wire. There was bare wire all through it. And I said, "So it's not a real good suggestion that we should put it back up somewhere?" And he goes, "Not unless you get it completely redone."
Yeah.
Right now, it is sitting in a closet. And because some of the church family feels it can be fixed someday, and I always go, "We'll put that on the agenda." And right now it's in the closet.
Yeah.
But it was something that took a lot of patience and a lot of time for them to absorb the thought that if we're going to move into the 21st century, this cross just might have to come down.
Yeah.
Not that it was the only cross in the church.
Yeah.
It's just, it was the cross they were used to in the front of the sanctuary.
Yeah.
Take a picture, put it on PowerPoint.
I mean, the Oak Cliff Baptist Church in Oak Cliff, New Jersey, where I remember, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
They put the screen that covered painting of the John baptizing Jesus that a member of the church years ago had painted.
Yeah.
And our people, technology people, were wise enough. They took a picture,
Yep.
and when the other things aren't up there, that's on there,
Yep.
and that was the end of
Yeah.
dealing with it. So that kind of low-level creativity is something
Yeah.
important in church.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. One farther back.
We have a small church, and so 2 services to accommodate the traditional and contemporary divide was not really a feasible option. And as we attempted to maybe incorporate some more contemporary music, it just wasn't working. Well, one day, a family walked in our door that had a sophomore and a senior in high school. And the senior played the piano and the sophomore played the drums. And so it's really about knowing what's important to your church.
Yep.
Because I mean, we prepared, the music committee met, we had conversations, we had people start talking to some of the people who we knew were not going to be okay with the drums. And when those conversations took place, it was, "Oh, well, absolutely David should play the drums. That's not a problem at all." And we have moved into, because what was important was getting the youth involved.
Yeah.
And unbeknownst to us, we were able to very successfully change over into a more blended worship style because we were accommodating what was really at the heart of some of these people, which was the youth, and that trumped drums or anything else that was going to happen.
That's great. That's great. That's a good one for us to move on with because, you know, remembering the characteristics of the family churches that we just talked about, the family church and the pastoral church. In neither one of those, you are not going to make change by pastoral fiat or by a church vote. It may look like you do on the surface, but when it comes down to it, you're not. The way you're going to make change is by working those relationships that you have with folks. You know, I'm not glamorizing this, but I just an example of my first church. like a lot of churches, a half dozen steps to get up the place. Other than that was laid out pretty well, except for steps getting in. And I knew we had to have a ramp. I knew the ramp was the way to do it. And the thing to do was to talk to Clyde Brown and say, Clyde, wouldn't Nellie be able to get in easier if we had a ramp on the east side of the church? I had a ramp in 2 weeks. No votes, no hassle. It was right for everything. Now, not everything's that simple, and I don't want to pretend like it is, but that is the better way to deal with it in small churches. Now, the big church is going to have a study. They're going to have a notebook produced of it. Some outside expert's going to come in and tell them, you're going to have a vote, you're going to do it. Okay, it works. It's not going to happen in that family church. You're going to have to find another way to do that, and it's going to have to deal with the relationships that you've got in that church before you can move on. So, well, change is where we're going on things, and so let's see here. We talked about the urgent issues for change right now, and those bottom 5 is what I want to talk about here as we move through the concluding moments of the discussion today. I talked about finances and facility, pastor, mission, and organization as being common issues for a church to deal with in terms of change, but also unique issues for the small church because of flavor. Now, what happens too often is finances gets put at the middle of things. It touches everything. Yeah, that's true, and I understand that, and I deal with money every day. I know what that's all about. But I also know that if we allow it to default to be the center and controlling factor of everything, we're not going to be able to deal with the issues that we've got to deal with, and we're not going to be faithful with who we are. And so one of the first things that's got to happen is to decenter finances and put mission back at the center of what we're talking about. And by mission, I don't mean just vision or purpose. While it includes vision or purpose, by mission I mean the mission that Christ gave us: as I've been sent, so send I you. That's what mission is all about. And while it includes vision and purpose and all that kind of stuff, until we lay hold of, until we own that commission that Christ has given us, that we've been sent into the world the same way he was sent, none of the rest of this is going to be put in the right perspective. But if we can keep mission at the center the way it ought to be, then we can deal with the facilities and the finances and the pastor and the organization in a different kind of way than if we allow finances to be at the center, because finances will suck everything else dry. It's just the nature of it. And the truth is, nobody gets excited about paying bills. They get excited about mission. And if we can make the connection that this mission is possible because this happens, that energizes folks. Paying the electric bill has never turned anybody on that I've met. But when we talk about, being able to have church at night and the program with the kids or the after school program or the lunch for the seniors, okay, that makes sense. But the electrical bill doesn't give anybody energy to be generous with their resources. So that's really what we're going to work on here right now, and I want to hear your things about it as we move forward. So let's talk about a mission as being made at the center of things. There are at least 3 things that are a challenge for smaller churches. And they are kind of the shadow side of their strengths. It's easy for small churches to become inward focused because of their family nature, because of their single cell nature that we've talked about, which is a strength for them. It's easy for them to think that's the whole blasted world, and everything becomes about them. And so that is a major challenge. The second challenge is program overload. Now, that may not be a challenge so much for the historic small church. It is a challenge for the church that was a program church at one time and has reduced now to the size of a small church. They still try to run all those programs that they were running, and it is hard to stop them. I know, I've been there. It really is difficult. But that program overload is a big piece, and being able to stop that. One of the wonderful things that I picked up from Rick Warren I think it was Rick Warren, was that 40-day respite of not doing anything in the church. Have any of you run across that or seen that? It's kind of a corollary to the 40 days of prayer thing. So we're not going to do anything else. We're closing down everything else for 40 days. Now that's startling to even consider that. But when you couple that with the idea of 40 days of prayer about what we're doing, and it gives folks the opportunity to say, you know, the church didn't fold down just because we stopped doing fill in the blank. We're still here. And in fact, the prayer thing made us more sensitive to what God was trying to do in our church. The third thing is that it's easy for the mission of small church to be misdirected. We had talked about this in some of the question sessions earlier on. There are lots of places this can happen, but one of the frequent ones is about children and youth. There's a lot of emotion about children and youth in church, and I do understand that, and I am a parent and all that stuff. But I also know sometimes in some situations that energy is misdirected because the community has few children. When the schools have closed, that ought to be a clue to somebody that something has happened in this community. When you've got a nursing home down the street from the church that nobody's paying attention to, that ought to be a flag to somebody in the church about something. And so sometimes small churches with their limited resources get misdirected toward a ministry that may be a good ministry for somebody else to do. Hear that carefully. May be a good ministry for somebody else to do, but they're missing a mission opportunity that they've got the resources for, that God may be calling them to do. And so, you know, I'm suggesting two questions that would help us and not just small churches, but any churches certainly. Who are we serving today? And that's a painful question sometimes, to go through what happens in your church and say, who does this affect? And make that column of in the church and out the church and see what happens. And if all the people serving all the groups served are inside the church, you need to do an inventory on what mission God has called you to in that place. And the second question sounds like it, but it means, but I do have a different intent there, and that's who should we be serving today, not who we imagine we should be serving. Sometimes it takes time to discover the situation in your particular neighborhood. You may have to run some demographics, and Lord, that's so easy now compared to what it was 20 years ago. You can go online in 5 minutes and find out information that I would have had to work at for a week 20 years ago. But who should you be serving? Do you know about the Hispanic population that's been growing in your community? Have you noticed that ethnic grocery down the street? I startle folks in Illinois. You know, the fastest growing, the communities with the fastest growing Hispanic population in Illinois is not Chicago. It's a little river town called Havana, west of Springfield. And they are folks who have been attracted there because of the meatpacking industry. And the church there is oblivious to it. Done nothing with it. And there's all kinds of situations like that. So I think those are some key questions. Let's talk a little bit now. What are your ways that you've led your church to identify a mission for where you are in this time, in this place, things you feel good about, things you're hopeful for, things you might be encouraged to try. Who has a story to share with us out there? Anyone, go.
I'm Randy Paul, First Baptist of Franklin. 3 years ago when I came to the church, I got involved in a local discussion with community leaders and some pastors about partnering to do some mission work for people in need. And it was an opportunity that we didn't seek, that we didn't look for, that we didn't identify. It wasn't my idea, but I was asked to be part of it. And since then, it has become a organization that has served 280 families in our county with the help of about 40 churches in the last 2 years. But,
Wow.
And it's a partnership with local government. So, anytime I talk about it, I have two questions that are two statements, and ask people which one of these is more frightening or more surprising. That local government would trust churches to help the poor, and allow us to evangelize, allow us to pray with people, allow us to invite them to church and all that stuff, or that local churches would trust each other to do the work together. Both of which are shocking, and both of which I'm very proud of and happy that we were able to do. But it was something that I didn't expect in a million years we would be doing.
Yeah.
I just went to a meeting, and they looked at us and basically said, "Will the churches help?" And it was just a question of put up or shut up. Are we going to help the poor, or are we not going to help the poor?
Wow.
And so we've been involved with that with the Methodists and Lutherans and Catholics and everybody in the county. So it's pretty cool.
Good story. Good story. Somebody else who's discovered mission.
David Brandon, back at Westchester. Our church has the privilege of being one of the first churches to go through the collab process with our region. And I think one of the ways we discovered mission was by using the concept that Will teaches of the diamond summary, which looks at your gifts and your passions as a congregation. Is that correct? Begins with gifts, right?
Yep.
And the second was your local predicament, what's your unique concept. And third, your apostolic esprit, what really gets your juices flowing.
Right.
And so through that process, we identified the gift of hospitality for our congregation. And it's not just welcoming people on Sunday morning, but it's really embracing people, getting to know each other. We have a grad school student. We have a local college. The second largest state university in Pennsylvania is in Westchester, and Westchester University. And so we've focused on college ministry. And part of that, we've started a house for students to live together and to be a place off campus where they can invite people to come, other students to come, so it's not in the church building, which can be a barrier. And I think the other thing, the hospitality, we went so far as we had a grad student from Rwanda who his wife needed a sponsor in order to come and study. And our church and one member in particular stepped forward to be a sponsor, which was actually, if something would go wrong in their situation, we would be financially responsible for assisting them. That's hospitality to me. And so that's how we've gone about that through that collab program, and it's been effective. And we've instituted we brought some other changes along through the process.
Story here. Got one back there. Right here.
I'm Mark McCown of West Isle Baptist Church, which is in Erie, unless you live in West Isle. And it's important if you live in West Isle. The first Christmas that I was there, we decorated the church and we put our nativity set in the courtyard, the beautiful courtyard, put it in the courtyard. And I said, well, why don't we put it here? Why don't we put it out front? And they said, well, somebody might steal it. And so they were more than happy to tell you about Jesus, but you had to come in. You had to come into the building. So we talked about that a little bit. And in the 16 years since then, we have a clothing pantry. We have a preschool. We have an after-school program. We invited people from the neighborhood in, which was entertaining for a while. If people have never been to church and you bring them to church and sit them down, it's a show. So.
That's right. Come back there, Jeff.
Cheryl Wilson from Martin Luther King Baptist Church. Our church in the last few years partnered with Heeding God's Call, which is the organization against gun violence, and we're in Harrisburg. And it's a multi-denominational church or program where we have prayer vigils for individuals that had been shot through gun violence. And it has come now, we're in the Hall Manor area, which is a project area of Harrisburg, but even though our church isn't like the president of the board or anything, they are calling our church to ask for prayer vigils to be set up. And people will come to our church and gather at our church after these incidents happen. The point that parents are calling our pastor and say, and they want to tell the pastor their story and tell the people at our church their story and their loss, and it's opening up the community to be able to grieve and to try to figure out other avenues of how we can dissolve these problems.
Okay, good. We'll do some others a little bit later. Let's talk about a second challenge that we have in small churches, and that has to do with organization. I get called in on that. The number one question is, we've got too many jobs for too few people. And that ought to be a red flag immediately that you're over-organized. You've got too much going on. The second one, which is related to that, is trying to sustain an organization for another time and another place. Classic example there is the church still trying to operate on a constitution that was put together in 1955. And the truth is, it wasn't theirs then. They just copied it from somebody else because they didn't want to do the work that was necessary to think about organization, and it never worked then, and it certainly doesn't work now for them. Yet they struggle with that. And somehow or other, getting permission to do something different seems very hard for them. I'm not sure what that's all about. And the third one is they're organized that way just because. We have to own that one. Sometimes some overeager young pastor comes in straight from seminary and shoves a new constitution down their throats that they didn't want in the first place, or some regional staff person who was overeager came and helped them organize in a way that was not helpful a long time ago, and they've still got it, but it's on the books and that's all there is to it. They don't use it, and it's not helpful at all. In fact, it's a detraction. I suggest two questions around the issue of organization. First, does our organization serve members or does it serve mission? And that's related to that very first thing, is if mission is the center thing, then the organization of the church ought to be about mission. And if you can't make that connection on it, you need to go back and pray a little while. The second one is how to organize most effectively for mission here and now with accountability. Now, I know that there are some things out there tend to be the younger ones, and I'll try not to get too nasty about that, who think organization is unnecessary, but organization brings accountability to things. It's never supposed to be a throttle. It should bring accountability, and that really is the issue when we do organization. How are we making sure that we're doing the right thing? And so as we think about organization, how does it progress mission, and how is it establishing accountability on things? And the truth is, most churches, in my experience, can streamline dramatically over what they've got now. I'll get fired again here. There is no reason to have an elected flower committee of 8 members with rotating terms. No reason. Find somebody with the gifts for that and let them do it. But our committee focus reflects an attitude of a past generation. You got people involved in the church by what? Giving them a job. And even better, getting them on a committee. And as we were talking about earlier with the younger generation, they've had it with committees. They don't want anything to do with that. And the truth is, I'm persuaded that the boomer generation that's getting ready for retirement has had it with committees too. And just wait and see in 5-10 years what's going to be happening with that, because you're going to be left impossible to populate the committees that you've got now, because my generation is going to say, I've been there, done that, I'm not doing it anymore. I'll be glad to work on the Habitat Project for you. I'll be glad to go down to Costa Rica and work on something down there. There's a zillion, I'll do it after school tutoring time with kids. I ain't doing committees anymore. And we've got to find a way to streamline it and make it directly connected to mission and ministry so that people have a sense of accomplishment out of it. Let's talk a little bit about organization. What's your experience with organization? And go ahead, Kevin.
Do you want to take any breaks?
Do we need to take a break? We need to take a break. Okay, we'll take a break.
Let's take a short one.
A short. All right. Okay, Kevin will sing and we'll come back, right? Thank you.
10 minutes max, folks. We're going to come back.